So good morning, everybody. I'm Jennifer Jacobus. I'm the Director of HR Services over at SDEA. You won't hear too much of me today. I'm going to do some questions with Lee when we get started here, but we're going to focus on our experts today. All right, so getting started, first I want to introduce Lee. Lee Wills Irvine. She is currently the head of talent acquisition and inclusion over at Sony Electronics. Lee is a valued senior human resources leader, and her expertise is in diversion and inclusion, but also employee relations, talent acquisition, at both the global and the Fortune 500 level. She's worked at companies that we're all familiar with, like Intel and Qualcomm, and now she's at Sony. Lee's respected for creating mission-focused strategies. She has a strong belief in the power of technology to positively change lives, and she's passionate about connecting businesses and community. You guys can read her full bio in the booklet and information that we sent over. But we invited Lee to be part of this because of the obvious, right? Some of the things that are going on, especially with the recent movement in the Black Lives Matter, understanding how important it is, and really a good thing that we're getting lots of inquiries from our members and non-members on diversity and inclusion training and what that looks like in companies. So we're happy that people are taking action and or maybe kind of ramping up their actions. And so we thought that this would be very timely to have Lee join us here today. So excuse me, I'm going to ask Lee some questions, but of course we invite questions from you guys as well. So starting off, Lee, so for those who don't have a clear understanding, can you explain the difference for us between diversity and inclusion?
Good morning, everyone, and Jennifer. So first of all, thank you for inviting me to talk with your members today. I really appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to talk about something that is always important and particularly on the forefront of everyone's mind, along with COVID right now. So again, thank you. And the difference between diversity and inclusion, great question. Diversity is really having underrepresented groups within all levels of your workforce. So making sure that your organization is diverse as your clients and your customers. Inclusion is about creating an environment where all employees feel that that they belong, that they're valued and respected and supported to do their best work. I'd like to add another element to that, and those are things that you may hear, equality and equity. And equality is about treating everyone the same, right? We all are familiar with that term. We want to be treated fairly and equally. And equity is about removing barriers for underrepresented groups to level the playing field for everyone. So a lot of times you will see D, E, and I, and that E can stand for equality or equity.
Great, thank you. That's good learning for me right off the bat there. So everybody's seeing in what's going on in the news and unfortunately with George Floyd, but with the recent Black Lives Matters movement, many employers we're seeing on our end anyhow are looking within really at their own diversity and inclusion policies, what their company statements are, actions they're taking, what they're choosing to support. From your perspective and your experience, what's the ideal starting point for an employer to develop this type of a culture, or really hopefully place more emphasis on diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to applaud those companies that are taking a look internally and saying, what can we do different, better? How are we doing? And I think the first place to start is similar to where we start with a lot of things, and it's an internal assessment. How are we doing? What are our policies and practices? Is our representation? What does our data show us in some specific areas? Because when you're addressing D&I, it's not just a one answer, but it's really a holistic system. So what does your recruitment and selection process look like? What have you or what are you doing for culture in terms of managing bias? Is that something that's on your radar? What sort of development and educational opportunities are available for your employees? And what about your performance management systems and promotions? What does that look like? And how are you evaluating your employees? Have you looked at the systems? And then also work-life balance. This may not seem as obvious, but I think it's particularly important now in the era in which we're living, where so many of us are working from home, and there's always competing priorities. And how do we manage those competing priorities? If you take a look at, for example, right now, like I said, so many of us are working at home. Many folks have kids, and with schools not knowing what's going to happen, they're balancing work and family 24/7. So what are those competing priorities, and how may they affect the equity and equality within your organization? Does that make sense?
Completely, yeah, and that's a whole other issue that families are going to be having to deal with, I think, coming up here in the fall. But you're right, it's going to affect different families differently. So it's something I know from our end that we have already started encouraging our members and our employers to start thinking about what that's going to look like when schools don't go back. So with diversity inclusion, and I think we're getting a better understanding of what that means, but can you let us know, or from your perspective, Lee, why it's important, and then how do we get there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, why it matters is really about what I said earlier in terms of our workforce and business. So a diverse workforce, the diversity of our workforce enable us to attract the best diverse talent to positions, and helps make all of us employers of choice. When you're looking for folks, when you have job openings and the people that are working for you, one, you want to retain them, and two, when you're searching for folks, you want them to think of you as a place where they want to work. So that's the diverse workforce. You add that to an inclusive workplace, and that's where you've got leaders actively seeking out new ideas and different perspectives, and employees feeling valued. All of that together equals business impact, improved collaboration, better decision-making, more efficiency, innovation, the things that are going to actually drive your business and create bottom line results. So it's critical to have the diverse workforce that's valued for that business impact.
A little bit of a different angle. I got this question from one of the listeners here, one of the people on, that is asking, from a small business perspective, and I know I'm kind of throwing this at you, and I get your experiences with some of the larger companies, but from a small business perspective that may have limited resources, how do they find good D&I resources that might guide them to be a better organization?
Yeah, there is a lot out there on the internet. Some that I would recommend include SHRM, obviously, Society of Human Resources Management, but one that I like in particular is National Center for Women in Information Technology, ncwit.org. And what's great about NCWIT is their primary focus is on women in technology, but so much of what they have is geared just towards diversity overall. And I lean towards the saying of a rising tide raises all boats. And this is so true in the case of diversity. When you put policies in place and practices in place in the diversity arena, they don't benefit just diverse groups, they benefit your entire workforce. So ncwit.org offers resources and toolkits that small businesses, educational institutions, even K through 12 schools, and they're segmented by workforce, education, can go and utilize in order to implement practices within their organizations.
That's perfect. I love what you said too, Lee, because this is, I know on some of the training we've started doing is the emphasis on that this diversity and inclusion with the training or whatever steps the companies and employers are choosing to take, that it's not benefiting just those diverse, employees or, providing inclusion for them, that it is better for the entire company and it helps everybody and it does make a better work environment. And I think going forward, when we get back to quote unquote normal, that more and more employees are going to be looking for that type of a work environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I think a lot of us have heard the term, and especially now, of unconscious bias. Can you give us some examples of what that looks like?
Yeah, so unconscious bias. If you've got a brain, which we all do, then we've got biases. Unconscious bias is something that is built into our human psyche. And what it really is are sort of shortcuts that we use to make decisions. And sometimes that's okay, but a lot of times it's not. I want to give you an example. So a shortcut would be for you to determine, if you need to get a new refrigerator, you can quickly think, okay, I'm going to go to one of the box stores and that's going to get you there. You're going to do some assessments, you're going to figure out the best way to get there. But where you don't want to use an unconscious bias is in, for example, the hiring process. You don't want to think, oh, I know John, so I'm automatically going to hire John. That is a time where you want to put some time and thought and reasoning into play to figure out what is actually the best answer and not lean towards just someone that you know or someone that you're familiar with. And that's where biases come into play. Another word for biases that you could substitute might be preferences, right? Because what are our preferences? And so we want to look beyond what we're used to and comfortable with to make sure that we're making really the best decisions. There's all kinds of different biases out there, from proximity biases to working more frequently with people that are physically close to, like if we were back in the office, for example, the people that are near us rather than the people in our Los Angeles office, for example. Another type of bias is time biases. Sometimes when we're rushed, we make decisions that are easy rather than long-term, looking at the long-term effects. So there's over 160 different types of biases. So it's just important that we slow down before we fall into those. And when we most frequently fall to our biases is when we are rushed for time, under stressed, maybe fearful about something. So if we can be more mindful and carve out time, that's going to help us. The other thing about biases is we don't recognize them. We don't realize that we have them. That's why they're called unconscious. So we usually need a friend or a colleague, a trusted ally to point out in a situation where we may be operating or our bias is showing and we don't know it. And I think that's really what's important to call out. We might think that we're aware of some of our biases, but if we are, then those aren't unconscious, right? It's the ones that we don't know about that can cause issues.
Yeah, I know when we talk about unconscious bias and where they come from, whether it's how we grew up, the social circles, religion, history certainly is part of it. But taking that into consideration and what you were just talking about, do you think that biases can be unlearned?
That's a great question. What I think we can do is become aware of the fact that unconscious bias is a risk. And what we can unlearn are the behaviors. And those behaviors include, like I said, asking for feedback, trying not to make important decisions when we are stressed or rushed, and being more thoughtful. So it's really about the behaviors rather than the feelings or the biases. And certainly that doesn't mean people can't become more educated on certain things and change their perspective, but we're always going to have some unconscious biases. And so that's why we really want to focus on the behaviors and how we can do things differently and more consciously.
Okay, thanks, Lee. I know this is kind of a interesting, this question I'm going to ask you now is something I think that people in companies, since that's what we're talking about, kind of our focus, struggle with, but just really also in their everyday life. And based on what has happened in the world over the last couple of months, again, kind of going back to the Black Lives Matter, how do we make people more comfortable talking about race and racism, right? But even, you know, when we're talking about diversity, inclusion, it's everybody. I know that's been a focus and an important focus, but even things like somebody's sexual orientation, maybe religion, you know, is there a fine line on what can be discussed, what's appropriate?
Great question, Jennifer. So I will say that there is a line, and what the first line is where anyone feels uncomfortable. So that's one we don't want to cross. I do believe that there is room to discuss these things. I will give you an example. At Sony, after the George Floyd really horrific incident and other things that came up in the news, we decided to have some sessions, open conversation sessions with employees, where I was hosting those along with the president of the company and our associate general counsel. And these were really listening sessions. And we did this because Martin Luther King Jr. has a quote that I'll paraphrase, and it's that in challenging times, it's not the harsh words of our enemies that we'll remember, but the silence of our friends. And so it was really important to us that we not be silent and we talk with our employees, and even more than that, listen. And so what we did was to open up a forum and a platform similar to this, and just, you know, shared our thoughts and feelings on what was going on in media in the world related to social justice, inequities, things of that nature, what we had seen, what we read about, and shared our feelings and experiences, and open up the forum for employees to do the same. And I have to tell you, it was positively, absolutely positively received by the employee base. I did a survey afterwards. We had 2 sessions with over 250 people in each session, and 98% of the people that responded in both times said that it was a valuable use of their time. They recommended it for others, and they wanted to do it again, and had just really great positive comments on that. So I believe that there is there's room and there's time and a place for those things. You do not want to make people feel uncomfortable, though. I think it's also important that you have an opportunity to ask questions. If you ask a question because you, out of a place of a desire to understand, people are going to be open to that. Does that answer your question, Jennifer?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, I mean, you're using your example at Sony, which is perfect, but this is something that companies of any size can do and implement and open up, you know, the floor, or open up for conversations and questions. And you really hit the nail on the head with me on the silence part of it. Some of my friends, specifically one friend that I have who is a Black female, and she shared with me, you know, after the George Floyd incident, that she was kind of hurt by some of her friends that didn't reach out, or, you know, even asking the questions. And I had to ask questions, you know, on how are you? How is this affecting you? And, you know, it's been a huge learning thing for me, but hearing her, though, talk about that was the silence from her friends that affected her more than people saying, I think I reached out to her saying, I don't know what to say, but she said, that's all you need to say. So, you know, that really hit with me, you know, kind of confirming what I've heard from some of my friends personally as well.
Thank you for sharing that. That is just a great example, and you were right. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so I think you've kind of addressed this a little bit, but anything else that companies can do to ensure that everybody feels included?
I think that one of the things is just letting everyone know that the conversation is open, that whether it's with their manager or HR, that the communication lines are open. If they'd like to come in and have a conversation, you are there to talk about it. So letting employees know that you're aware of what's going on and you're available if they'd like to talk about the situation or have any concerns. So making your availability clear.
Yeah.
And if the company can make a stand in some way, I think that's helpful as well.
Perfect. Okay, Lee, I did get a question here, two questions actually. So first one is, what are you currently observing in the technology industry with respect to DEI? They go on to say many companies such as Intel have had efforts in this space for literally decades. In your experience, have you seen improvement in terms of numbers of females, African Americans, Hispanics in the technology space?
Yeah, I see that question, and I see it's Regina Buckley. I'm wondering if it's the Regina Buckley that I know. If it is, good morning, Regina. So, yes, this is an ongoing issue, and I will tell you, it's one of the reasons I continue to do work in this space. And at Intel, it was actually what drew me to Intel, is that at the time, the CEO made a commitment to get to parity, and with a lot of very focused company-wide efforts. I mean, very focused company-wide efforts. Intel did get there, but it does require a lot of effort and a lot of resources in order to do that. And the number one thing that is required is that executive commitment, and that commitment from the top, the CEO, the board of directors, to make change, because your day-to-day line manager is really focused on delivering results, and he or she needs to understand that diversity is one of those results that they need to deliver. So if it's not an ingrained part of the business, it is not going to actually happen. So I just want to underscore, double click on that it really, D&I has to be part of the overall business. In terms of seeing improvement in African Americans, women, Hispanics in the technology space, the numbers are moving, but not at the rate that I would love to see. I think different companies have had success at varying levels. Athena, at their Pinnacle Awards next week, is going to come out with a report for San Diego on women, so you'll be able to read more about that then. Specific companies like Google and Intel have seen movement. Some companies don't release their numbers, so we don't exactly know how they're doing. So there is still absolutely opportunity for improvement. And each company really has to look internally to say, is this a separate initiative or is it part of our overall business practices? Because that's the only way they're going to see definitive and sustainable change. Thanks for the question.
Yep, top down. So, well, you can see Regina's other question then, but I'll read so everybody else can hear it. What are you observing with respect to employee biases incoming from other countries? Specific like H-1 visas, as was her example.
What are we observing with respect to employee biases coming from other countries? So if I'm understanding, meaning that people from other countries may have biases, I'm not totally sure I understand the question.
All right, well, we can circle back with Regina later, since it seems like you guys know each other too. Yeah, so coming up against our time here, I just want to end with this last question, or maybe comment / question. So the book that everybody's reading now, and seen it in the news, The White Fragility. I have it sitting on my desk right now. It's gained an enormous following recently. I don't think it's new, but what other resources? I know you gave us the website, which actually I would love for you to repeat, but what other resources would you recommend from either an employee level or even management level?
So I wanted to let the gardener pass.
Oh.
So
I have that today too.
So a couple that really come to mind. One is Blind Spot. It's the Blind Spot, The Unconscious Biases of Good People by Mahzarine Banaji. And she's a Harvard University professor. That's one. Another is How to Be an Anti-Racist. That's another great one. I actually happened to see D'Angelo, the author of Right Fragility, speak at a conference. It was actually an NC Wit conference that I just put into the chat. And her book is quite good. Hearing her speak was very compelling. So I think it's definitely worth a read. I would check those out as well. And there's a lot of great podcasts out there that I think are really good for people to go in and take a listen to. You want to find out, because the topics vary, what is it that's compelling to you right now? Is it really about what's going on in the area of social justice? Is it, what area of diversity would you like to go deeper on? And there's great information. So lots of ways to get it.
Perfect.
There is one more I wanted to add, and it's the 1619 Project by Anna DuVernay, and that's another one I would encourage people to look at.
Perfect. I'm writing these down. And Lee, what was the website you gave again? It was ncwit.org?
Yep, that's it.
Okay. I'm going to check that one out too. All right. Well, I think we answered most of our questions here. I might have one more. Let me check. I can get it to pop up. Oh, that was you. Okay. Yeah, I think we've answered all our questions. Thank you so much, Lee. I know I learned something. I think we all learned additional information. This is going to be a topic that is well deserving of more exploration, and hopefully companies are looking within to really see what they can do here. So thank you for your expertise and your knowledge and answering our questions and sharing your time with us.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. Great talking with everybody, and you take great care, Jennifer.
Thanks. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right.